strengthening gender-responsive technical and scientific cooperation for the Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework implementation, the role of regional and subregional support center. My name is Eda Fernandez. I am currently the chair of the CBD's Women's Caucus Board of Directors, and we are delighted to have you with us at this amazing session that is co-hosted by the RMCRD, Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development, CARICOM, the Caribbean Community, SPREP, the Secretariat of the Pacific Region Environment Program, UNEP's World Conservation Monitoring Center, and the IUCN Commission on Environmental, Economic, and Social Policy. This morning, Ms. Marema highlighted the importance of regional centers in implementation, as global goals mean little if they do not foster national implementation. However, and despite the relevance of women's roles and rights regarding implementation, there has been limited discussion on how the technical and scientific cooperation mechanisms, particularly regional and subregional support centers, can integrate gender-responsive approaches into their mandates, programming, technical assistance, partnerships, and implementation support. This entails strengthening engagement with women's organizations and leaders, including those from indigenous peoples, from local communities, and from people from African descent, as well as the gender experts in regional and subregional implementation processes. We are gathered here as a starting point in outsetting and reinforcing the dialogue between representatives of regional and subregional support centers, women's organizations, parties, and other stakeholders on the opportunities, challenges, and support needs for advancing gender-responsive implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework through the work of technical and scientific cooperation mechanisms, including the regional and subregional centers. Now I'm out. Concretely for today, the objectives we are aiming to address are exploring the role of regional and subregional support centers in advancing gender-responsive implementation of the framework and the CBD Gender Plan of Action. As I mentioned, to facilitate exchange between support centers, women's organizations, parties, and technical partners on regional experiences and good practices, and to generate reflections and practical recommendations to inform ongoing discussions on the SBI agenda and the future strengthening of the mechanism ahead of COP17. Let's keep in mind that this conversation matters because at SBI-7, parties will review the progress in the implementation of the long-term strategic framework and technical and scientific cooperation mechanisms, including activity reports submitted by regional and subregional support centers, and the global coordination entity for the 2025 to 2026 period. Discussions under this agenda item are expected to identify gaps, challenges, and opportunities to improve the delivery of technical and scientific cooperation ahead of COP17. Having shared with you these objectives and why this session is very important, let us start. It is my pleasure to introduce Ms. Sojung Kang, Associated Expert at the CBD Secretariat, who will present where we are now regarding the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism, addressing the mandate of the mechanism, the role of regional centers, and gender consideration in related decisions. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here in person, but she has sent us a clear video to help us start this conversation from facts and clarity on what has been agreed and what is there yet to be fully implemented. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Sojung Kang from CBD Secretariat, and thank you very much for inviting me to this event. Unfortunately, I'm unable to join in person, but I'm very pleased to contribute through this recorded presentation. So today, I'd like to share an overview of the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism of the CBD, where we stand at the moment, and a few reflections on gender considerations within the mechanism. So briefly about the background of the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism. At COP15 in 2022, parties adopted this mechanism as an official means of implementation for the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework and the Convention. And at the next COP, COP16, parties selected a network of 18 organizations to host technical and scientific cooperation support centers, while the CBD Secretariat was designated to host the global coordination entity. The mission of the mechanism is to promote and facilitate cooperation among parties and organizations so that science, technology, and innovation can effectively support the implementation of the Global Biodiversity Framework. And here, the TSCCs, the centers, are operating as a network of networks. So they're not expected to have expertise on every GBF target, but instead they connect the countries with the knowledge, expertise, technologies, and relevant partners that they need. So in that sense, the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism, it's an emerging support system designed to help deliver and achieve the goals and targets of the countries. So this is how the mechanism is structured. At the global level, the CBD Secretariat hosts the global coordination entity, and at the regional level, the TSC centers are spread across 4 regions, Africa, Americas, Asia and the Pacific, and Europe and Central Asia. And they are working closely with parties, experts, institutions, and partner organizations. So what do the technical and scientific cooperation centers really do in practice? Based on the COP decision, the centers are expected to promote and facilitate demand-driven technical and scientific cooperation. And this means that the support should be based on country needs and priorities. Second, the centers, they serve as a one-stop service center, helping the countries access information, expertise, some practical tools and knowledge to help implement their biodiversity targets. Third, they also mobilize resources and facilitate matchmaking. This means linking the countries seeking support with relevant organizations, experts, or even other countries, and also funding opportunities that are capable of addressing those needs. And another important function is knowledge sharing. The centers, they identify, document, and disseminate good practices and lessons learned so that the countries can benefit from successful experiences elsewhere. Finally, the centers are expected to maximize synergies with existing initiatives and mechanisms, avoiding duplication and building on what already exists. So overall, the technical and scientific cooperation centers, they act as connectors and facilitators, bringing together the needs and expertise, technologies, and resources to accelerate the implementation of the global biodiversity framework. And briefly about the global coordination entity, which is hosted by the CBD Secretariat. Um, It complements the work of the technical and scientific cooperation centers by facilitating coordination, communication, and collaboration across the network. And we also help align the center's work with the convention and KM-GBF, and supports the centers reporting to the COP, mobilizing resources and sharing of experiences and lessons learned among centers. Since the establishment of the mechanism, significant progress has been made so far. All the TSC centers, they have developed the work plans for the first biennium, and most of them have submitted the progress reports, and several have advanced governance arrangements and conducted the needs assessments with the parties. Partnerships are also being developed. Some centers, they created a pool of partners by opening a call for partnerships, and they are also leveraging existing initiatives and investing their own resources, which shows the strong commitments of the centers. Some technical and scientific cooperation supports are already being delivered, especially on the Target 2 and Target 3, and supports for other targets are currently under development. However, like any other new mechanisms, the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism also faces some challenges. And the main challenge is securing the predictable and sustainable funding, especially with the demand for support has been exceeding the delivery capacity of many centers, while the country needs remain extensive and complex. Then how is the gender responsiveness being addressed in the TSC mechanism? We already have some important elements in place. First of all, when the TSC centers, when they establish their steering committees, along with the national focal points from the countries, they also include women, youth, and IPLC representatives in the committee as well. Not all of them have established the steering committee yet, but it's currently underway in an active way. Also, in the COP decision 16-3, subject to the availability of resources, the global coordination entity is mandated to develop guidelines to ensure gender-responsive approach and the active engagements of women, youth, and indigenous people in local communities. Well, the work hasn't been taken forward yet due to the resource constraints, and the gender position in the Secretariat has also been vacant for some time, which has made it difficult to advance the developments of this guideline. However, the spirit of the mechanism is to be demand-driven. So parties need to make the requests for support, and our approach here is to integrate the gender considerations wherever possible in responding to those needs. And looking ahead, we also see an opportunity to make this more systematic. So for the next biennium, we will include the development of this gender guidelines among our priorities as we envisage the gender specialists joining the Secretariat, and we will be very, very happy to work with the CBD Women's Caucus and others in developing these together. And to advance the gender responsive implementation of the KM-GBF through the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism, we would also like to invite all of you to contribute in a few practical ways. Firstly, kindly review the work plans of your respective TSC centers and identify the opportunities to where to integrate the gender responsive approaches, and connect with your TSC center. Share with them the tools and guidance that can support the gender responsive implementation of the global biodiversity targets. And we also encourage you to become part of this network of networks. Here you can also offer your gender expertise and support others across the mechanism. Also partner with your TSC Center in designing and delivering capacity development activities that strengthen gender-responsive implementation. And finally, we also invite you to work with us, the global coordination entity, in developing the guidelines for a gender-responsive approach so that we can collectively strengthen the gender responsiveness of the TSC mechanism and ultimately contributing to more inclusive implementation of the KM-GBF. So thank you very much for your attention. You can contact us through this email address on the screen and also find further information on the technical and scientific cooperation mechanism on the website. Thank you everyone, and we look forward to the continued collaboration.
We thank Ms. Kang for this amazing video. We can take notes of it. No, we should. Well, next in our agenda, we have an interactive roundtable that will address the challenges, opportunities, and practical measures to strengthen gender-responsive technical and scientific cooperation for the implementation of the global framework. To present our distinguished panelists and moderate this panel, I give the floor to Ms. Tiffany Strasser, the International Policy and Conventions Lead of the UNEP's Work Conservation Monitoring Center. Tiffany, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Ed, and thank you everyone else for coming and for sharing your time with us. I also want to acknowledge this event is being live streamed, and we're so grateful to those of you who can join us online as well. I'm so excited to be here to introduce this panel and have this discussion because we're in such an exciting moment where we have this strong political mandate for gender responsive implementation of the KM-GBF. Gender is one of the cross-cutting considerations that countries have said needs to be part of how we implement and how we report and evaluate the KM-GBF. And yet we've heard from the global report, the findings that we were discussing last week and continuing to do so this week, that countries are struggling a bit to find the right data, to make the right connections, to bring these considerations into how they are assessing their progress and taking the next steps forward. So there's work to be done. We're also in very interesting times. We are being asked to do more with less. And of course, we're hearing that one of the most effective ways to do that is through a whole of society approach and through cooperation. And so we have this wonderful mechanism with the TSCs as technical and scientific cooperation centers. I really want to stress that cooperation because the TSCs bring both a deeper understanding of regional priorities and circumstances and needs. They also have similar challenges, and there is I think, great opportunity in cooperating with the countries, of course, but cooperating also as TSCs and with this global coordination entity. So we're going to hear a little bit from our panelists today about what we have, what we know, and what we're already doing. And I hope we'll hear a bit about what we need, what partnerships we need to address data gaps or to connect with women's organizations and bring in those perspectives for that effective whole of society approach. So I have the great pleasure to introduce our panel today. I'm going to run through everyone's names and then we'll hear from each of them. Tesha Jean-Baptiste represents CARICOM, and we have a video. Tesha was unable to join us again today in person, but we have a presentation she will share. And then we'll hear from Abigail Soom, who is a communications specialist at the Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development. We will hear from Monifa Few, who is the Biodiversity and Ecosystems Advisor at SPREP for the Pacific Islands. We'll hear from Sonia Peña Moreno, who's the Director for the IUCN Center for Policy and Law, and IUCN hosts 2 regional TSCs centers. And we'll hear from Amelia Arreguin Prado, who is the coordinator of CBD Women's Caucus, and from Christina, and I must apologize if I'm saying this incorrectly, Tabulchenas. Christina Tabulchenas, now we can all say this name correctly, who's program manager with the CBD Secretariat. So thank you so much. And let's first hear from Tesha Jean-Baptiste. We'll go to the video first. Thank you.
Greetings, distinguished delegates, colleagues, partners, and co-presenters from the CARICOM Secretariat. It is my pleasure to join you today to share some thoughts on strengthening gender-responsive approaches within the Technical and Scientific Cooperation, or TSC mechanism, and its network of regional support centers. For Caribbean small island developing states, technical and scientific cooperation is not a luxury, it is a necessity. As highlighted during our first meeting of the CARICOM TSC Partners Network in March of this year, TSC centers have the potential to serve as regional hubs that connect countries with experts, research institutions, implementation partners, and funding opportunities while facilitating region and South-South cooperation and knowledge exchange. However, if we are to fully realize the objectives of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, we must ensure that these mechanisms are also inclusive and gender responsive. Women across our region are scientists, researchers, farmers, natural resource managers, entrepreneurs, indigenous knowledge holders, community leaders, and environmental advocates. In the Caribbean, women are also highly visible in tertiary education, public sector leadership, and regional and international environmental negotiations, including in processes such as BBNJ and the CBD. The issue, therefore, is not the absence of capable women or the lack of women's leadership. Rather, it is whether gender-responsive approaches are being applied deliberately and consistently so that the knowledge, priorities, and lived experiences of women and men are reflected across biodiversity planning, technical cooperation, financing, implementation, and monitoring. The good news is that many of the building blocks for a gender-responsive approach are already reflected within the proposed CARICOM Technical and Scientific Cooperation Center 5-year work plan. For example, the work plan proposes the establishment of a regional roster of experts and institutions that will identify technical, scientific, and traditional knowledge expertise from across the Caribbean. This presents a significant opportunity to ensure that women scientists, women researchers, indigenous women knowledge holders, and women practitioners are systematically represented within the region's technical cooperation architecture. The work plan also includes the development of a Caribbean-wide biodiversity data hub, regional biodiversity monitoring frameworks, and regional guidelines for the production of gender disaggregated data. These initiatives are particularly important because one of the major barriers of gender-responsive implementation is the limited availability of data demonstrating how biodiversity policies, programs, and investments affect women and men differently. Better data will lead to better policies and more effective interventions. Another important example can be found in the CARICOM TSC Communications and Visibility Initiatives. The proposed program includes awareness and engagement campaigns on protected area management that explicitly seek the participation of indigenous people and local communities, women, and youth. These initiatives can help ensure that women's contributions to biodiversity conservation are not only recognized, but elevated and shared across the region. Importantly, the CARICOM TSC Action Plan recognizes the value of traditional knowledge, free, prior, and informed consent, and engagement with indigenous people and local communities. This creates opportunities to ensure that indigenous women and women knowledge holders are recognized as partners in biodiversity governance and innovation rather than simply beneficiaries of interventions. However, opportunities alone are not sufficient. Many institutions lack dedicated gender expertise and practical guidance on how to mainstream gender within technical cooperation programs. There are often insufficient resources for gender analysis, weak monitoring frameworks, and limited mechanisms for measuring outcomes related to women's participation and leadership. In addition, engagement with women's organizations and women-led groups is frequently ad hoc rather than systematic and institutionalized. To address these challenges, practical measures are needed. Regional support centers should have access to dedicated gender expertise through gender focal points, advisory services, or strategic partnerships. Gender responsive assessment tools, planning frameworks, and monitoring indicators should become standard features of TSC implementation. Women's organizations, indigenous women's networks, universities, national gender ministries, and institutions should be engaged as strategic partners throughout program design, implementation, and evaluation. Colleagues, the proposed CARICOM Technical and Scientific Cooperation Center provides a unique opportunity to demonstrate what an inclusive, effective, and transformative TSC mechanism can look like. This means ensuring that the TSC mechanism builds on existing women's leadership in the region while also strengthening the systems, data, and partnerships needed to make biodiversity cooperation consistently gender responsive, inclusive, and effective. By doing so, we will strengthen not only gender equality, but also the effectiveness, inclusiveness, and long-term sustainability of biodiversity across our region. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to our continued collaboration in building a stronger, more inclusive, technical and scientific cooperation mechanism for the Caribbean and beyond.
Thank you so much, Tasha, and thank you, everyone. I really loved how Tasha talked not just about building understanding and experience in delivering gender responsive action, but also articulating existing contributions so that they can be effectively shared for use in other contexts and really used for planning and for implementation. I have been reminded I need to also share with you the questions that we've asked our panelists. We also want to ask those of you who are with us today. So you'll see a Menti code you can scan here and give us your perspectives on these questions. And we also have, again, those people who are joining us online. We invite you to share your thoughts on the challenges that exist, the opportunities that we have for vetting gender responsive focus within these TSC mechanisms and what practical steps we should take going forward. So with that, I'd love to pass it now to Abigail Soon to give us this perspective, again, an African perspective now on this TSC mechanism and the opportunities for gender responsive. To you, Abigail. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm Abigail Soon, walked and data. I'll start by introducing RCMRD as an RCMRD is an intergovernmental organization that is slightly over 51 years old. And our work revolves around 4 thematic areas: agriculture and food security, land use, change, land governance and urban development, climate change and disaster risk reduction, and finally, ecosystem management and natural resource monitoring. Now, when you talk about gender responsive implementation of the KM-GBF, we're really talking about making sure that the systems we build for biodiversity implementation recognize the different people who generate, use, and are affected by biodiversity knowledge. So for us, the question is not whether gender should be integrated into technical and scientific cooperation. It's rather how we make the cooperation itself inclusive, from knowledge generation to access to technology, to decision making and policy implementation. Now, CBD, when CBD established the TSC mechanism, TSCs are seen as a one-stop service for parties, for women, for IPLCs, and for youth and other stakeholders. But for TSCs to become stronger partners for gender responsive KM-GBF, implementation for KM-GBF implementation, there is need to move from simply providing technical solutions to providing inclusive technical solutions. So in the capacity needs assessments that we've done so far amongst the countries that we cover as a TSC, it shows that countries need support, not just in the technical aspects. For example, GIS, Earth observation, biodiversity monitoring, spatial planning, biodiversity reporting, and data management. But it also flagged the need for inclusive planning approaches and stronger integration of women, youth, and IPLCs. We need to move from just including women into the room where these conversations are happening and involving them in the decision after the debate. So gender consideration, what we noticed is that gender consideration are something that various countries in the world. So for us, where it's working, we run several activities. For example, the recently held this is the diversity action. It was held in Nairobi, where we deliberately go together with women IPLC from over 25 countries, Eastern and Southern Africa, and give them a hands-on exposure on the tools they need to be able to tell their stories. And so we work with different organizations and also the CBD Caucus to be able to bring these people into areas. Because what we noticed in our previous conversations, when we are having conversations related to the diversity conservation, we normally include CBD focal stories, country focal stories in the conversations. And when they are in that room, the aspects of women representation, youth representation, IPLC always in that conversation. So our TSCP plan, inclusive and responsive delivery as part of how we define ourselves. So, however, there are still gaps that we need, and more often integrated at the level of individual activities than at the individual level design. So our data pipelines, for instance, aren't systematically disaggregated. So our partnerships with women organizations tend to be built around specific events. When you're organizing something, that's when you think about women networks, women groups. But they're not really they're not really sustainable. There is no long-term relationship with these organizations. And that's a challenge for us. And that is something that we need to work towards. So one of the key challenges that we've experienced in the region is technical and data related. A lot of the diversity data we work with is gender blind. We can tell exactly where a wetland or a forest is, or where restoration is happening and whatnot. But we often can't tell who depends on it, who manages it day by day, or how the loss of that ecosystem affects women differently than it affects men. So if that data isn't captured, then the policy that is built on that data won't capture it either. So, and then we also have the issue of capacity gap that isn't even visible. Having access to the data within and who gets invited to training rooms, that is still also an issue. And I think the biggest of all is the resource gap. So the demand for technical support already outstrips what we can source for economy. The gender responsive work, which takes delivery sustainability, is often the first thing that gets squeezed in funding its time. Thank you so much, Abigail. That's definitely reflecting what the hearing and the negotiations. Thank you so much. I apologize. I warned everyone I would be mean about time. Thank you. We hope these conversations continue throughout the week, of course, as well. So because I've had to go to the timer, I'm just going to quickly jump and give Monifa a chance to say your intervention as well. So thoughts from the Pacific Islands on the next steps as well.
Thank you. I speak on behalf of the Pacific Small Island Development States who are here in a very loud and colorful way. The Secretariat of the Pacific Environment Program is mandated by our member Pacific Island countries. That's 14 inclusive of metropolitan 5 countries and territories. With the TSCC, SPREP is the host for the TSCC. We are not resourced at all. However, we build on the relations amongst the mandate as the CBD regional coordination role and responsibility, as well as building on with the network of the Pacific Islands Roundtable for Nature Conservation. So these are 2 mechanisms in the Pacific hosted under SPREP and mandated to address nature conservation priorities with our member countries. Under the, I brought practical examples. I'm not going to repeat ourselves in this room, for we are all advocates of inclusive approaches. And so with no resourcing for the Oceania TSCC, we rely on our projects and programs. So yes, there is the issue of sustainability. However, the practical experiences of our projects ensure that we continue to connect back to the communities at hand and the socially vulnerable groups within these communities across the Pacific, where we have diverse cultures, language, level of progress within the agenda action plan in their country policy instruments at various stages of reporting. Hence, post-prep is ensuring that we support within the network of, I note our TSCC colleague talking about the mandate within the network. Throughout last week and this week, PCIT's position around the technical support issued by the TSCC, and in this case through SPREP, is limited. However, our highlights are through programs and initiatives within the network of partnerships, innovative relations that were built within our bilateral donors, as well as secured through the Pacific Islands Roundtable, as well as the TSCC mechanism. So woven into the fabric of the organization's gender policy mainstreaming, if you can call it, our projects are flagship for this type of tracking. So I brought a few. You can also go online and check it out. We also have a 5-yearly regional convening of the Pacific Islands Conference for Nature Conservation. We are on our 11th set of conference. And what is different is that we have 2 anchor dialogues within that conference that's going to reflect, celebrate, and highlight nature positive actions from the ground community level to government, where our CBD focal points are. And in these 2 dialogue, anchor dialogue sessions at this upcoming conference that will be held on the 7th to 11th with the government of New Caledonia, is global through the Global Biodiversity Youth Network, and the Pacific has a chapter. We also have the Pacific Nature First Indigenous Voices dialogue. So these are opportunities that in representation through SPREP as the mandated organization for environmental protection and biodiversity conservation for the Pacific region, as island region, is to try and mainstream this through opportunities that could leverage voices from the ground up. So that's, to me, I thought that highlighted as a practical example, and it could, we are here to answer any further questions if you like. I have my colleague, Lena, who is our also reporting on our TSCs. So technically, SWEP has not signed the agreement. But we are also responsible to still provide work plans, no budgeting, still report on it, because our mandated member countries, as echoed in substance, the sore points of in the things of implementation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, some of these resources are familiar and really very practical and useful. There's a lot to be gained from again, that existing work. I think you mentioned not just the use of projects, but the idea of supporting people across a different range of activities. And there's a blend between the TSCCs building that capacity internally and delivering some of that versus convening and bringing people together, as you mentioned, for dialogue. So I'd like to ask Sonia to speak about this perspective and the balance of TSCC responsibilities across those parts of the manual. Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for share some perspectives. I'm speaking on behalf of my colleagues that are based in the regional offices of IUCN that host 4 of the technical, scientific, and support centers. And those are based in the regional office for Eastern Europe and Central Asia, the Mediterranean Center for IUCN, the Asia Regional Office, and the regional office for West Asia. Quite a good geographical spread. And what we're thinking or already realizing is that the different perspectives of the countries they serve or they service are, bringing a lot of enrichment to the mandates of those TSC centers going forward. But let me just give you a few examples and maybe reflect on what you were just mentioning on the challenges that we all face as TSC centers in going ahead and doing, what is needed to service the needs of those countries that are knocking on our doors and calling for support, capacity. One is from the Asia Regional Office TSC. And it relates to something that was mentioned already by in terms of embedding in the governance structures of the TSCs this gender considerations from the outset. So the steering committees of those TSCs inviting, women to the table, but also making them part of the decision-making process and driving the process forward together. So the Asia Regional Office did just that. They had 2 first steering committee meetings in this year, April and June, and they invited for virtual meetings. They invited to the table a couple of other organizations that serve or represent women's interests, Indigenous Peoples' Rights International, and Women for Biodiversity. They were in the room taking decisions, discussing how to make sure that they are embedded from the beginning on the decisions of that TSC in particular. The first in-person meeting of that steering committee will take place in Bangkok later in the year, I think in December, and the same approach will be followed, inviting women's organizations to the table. The second example that I want to, bring forward is this issue of developing or co-developing knowledge products or different, products, if you want to put it like that, projects jointly with women's organizations. The Asia Regional Office again and the TSC is working through the Asia Protected Areas Partnership, the International Ranger Federation, the Asia Ranger Federation, and Women for Biodiversity together. And they are producing the first ever, I'm told, Asia's Women Rangers, Voices from the Front Lines of Conservation. It's compiling stories from Nepal's anti-poaching units to Bhutan's high altitude patrols to Sri Lanka's elephant conflict officers
et cetera, putting the face, human faces to those stories of conservation, protected areas, et cetera. This publication will be launched at next year's World Conservation, World Protected and Conserved Areas Congress in Panama. So an example of something concrete that can be done together with you. I have other examples, but I already heard the BIP, so maybe I'll elaborate afterwards if you want. Yeah, I have 1 minute.
You have 1 minute.
Oh my God, I have 1 minute. Okay, super. So another example from, in this time, is from the Regional Office for West Asia. What they, and the TSC that is associated with this regional office, they have worked more rather on developing technical standards and tools together with women, and making sure that gender is mainstream and considerations are from the outset again in that work. And they have and this is also in protected areas. They have published the first ever, gender-sensitive protected area management effective tool for Jordan. Don't ask me too much details. I can connect you with the colleagues that are working on that. But it's something that they are already, very much proud of. In Egypt and in Saudi Arabia, this PSC has been aligning with national protected area management plans with gender criteria in the IUCN Green List standard. So it's crossing or mapping out, what happens in, or what is a project from or an initiative from this regional PSC to the existing, knowledge products, tools that are available, cross-referencing and using those tools for more gender effective, co-construction.
Thank you so much. Wonderful to hear practical examples too. Thank you. These are exciting, and I wish we had so much more time to hear all these details and opportunities and ideas for what's next. With that, I wonder, in thinking about bringing these together and learning across regions, I'd like to pass it to Christina from the CBD Secretariat now for your thoughts.
Thanks so much. Well, Subregional did a really good job in presenting a bit what we're trying to do with this. And I'm really excited to hear about what all the different centers are doing with regards to incorporating gender considerations. And I think that we have a lot of other centers which we haven't actually reached out to find out what they are doing. And this is something that we can work on. It is actually in our work plan for the next biennium. We want to look at these gender guidelines, and that's why we're excited to be here as well, to hear from you and to also identify organizations that we could work with and that could be part of this network of networks. We do these monthly coordination meetings. We could definitely have this topic as a topic. We have annual coordination meetings that we're trying to do an annual coordination meeting in person. And then in the biennium, we'll probably have one in person and a more extensive annual coordination meeting that will be probably online. But this is a topic that we could also include on our agenda and see how the centers are doing. What is really great about these meetings is that the centers learn from each other. So, what CARICOM is doing and what SPREP is doing, they share these experiences, good practices, tools. So this is sort of what our role is, to bring everyone together and to share that. So this is something that we can definitely do. And I don't know if there's time to also hear from the audience about, what they're working on and how they can contribute to this.
So with that, we have, we'd like to hear just a couple of words from Amelia as well, so that we have a little bit of time to hear from you. I remind you again, the Mentimeter is also there. I know we won't be able to hear from everyone who has something to say, but we want to hear from you online as well. Can I pass it quickly to you, Amelia? And then we'll come back. I'd like to hear from each of the PSC centers who already spoke. If there's one practical thing that you thought people could leave this room and do tomorrow, what would that be? We'll hear from Amelia.
So much. I think I will just focus on mentioning three things. First off, that we are really happy to have been convening this conversation, because from our perspective, it was something that was missing, like
convening the centers and discussing about what is the mandate related to gender, exchange between partners in different periods, like who's doing what, let's learn from the other, let's maybe copy if it's working, right? Or let's expand together whatever is there. So just to say that we're happy to be able to have convening the start of a conversation, because definitely 1 hour is never enough. We see this perhaps as a first step. But I perhaps just want to touch on two ideas. One is that I agree a lot with what Abigail said, and others said it like with other words. What about the intentionality? We have heard in many spaces that gender approaches, social inclusion, will never be addressed, will never be incorporated, because there's always lack of funding, there's always lack of capacity, lack of many things. But as long as there is intentionality, we can make everything happen. But also, having heard from Monica, I also agree with her on that without money, many things won't happen, because it's possible. And coming out from follow, one of the things I follow, we know that money is there. There's money in the world. It's staff that we're using it for different activities that are not in support for life as we are all pursuing, right? So maybe the intention is not to conclude anything, but just to take learning reflection out from this starting conversation and bring it to the decisions that we follow. Decisions that will be taken, or conversations taken here in SBI, decisions that will be taken in top 17, or building on the decisions that have already been decided. Those guidelines, these parties that are here, request them, because if you don't request them, they won't be drafted. Secretariat, technical centers, women's organizations are here. We are super happy to partner with those that have invited us as CBD Women's Caucus, with our more than 900 members. So gender focal points, some of you mentioned it, those are super powerful allies that are working. Amel is here, and many others that they are eager also to support, they're eager to be supported as well. So this network of networks, perhaps that's my last thought. Let us tap on it. I see so many allies sitting in so different positions. So let us all see what we can contribute to implementing that. 1 minute. Thank you so much. It's hard to speak after that, but may I invite you, the representatives of the TSC we have with us today, is there one thing you would like to take into action as a leader? Abigail. But anyway, I think one of the practical things that we can take from this room is to ensure that as TSCs, when we are undertaking our capacity needs, of course, we can find it. We should always ensure that we are gender responsive, right? And not just adding gender as an extra question at the end of it, but rather build in how we ask about the need, gap in the past. And also to have tools that are genuinely accessible, not just technically available.
Well, I'm going to that's part of the network of networks. That is, PSCs are, the opportunity we have in front of us is, and following on the issue of fundraising and money availability and effective use of the resources available, I think that we have to use those PSC centers to channel not only the needs and the demand, but also how we respond to those needs and demands with existing experiences, expertise, existing resources, and also, fundraising together, because that's part of the the plan, even though if it's not stated in the mandate, it's part of what needs to be done, right? Instead of competing for those resources that are available, but not, accessible perhaps, then it's, how do we present a united front of these different teams that are responding to different geographical needs, but ultimately they respond to the same sort of calls for support.
Yeah, okay. So I'm distracted. Um, with the PCs and its rep. Some of these practical measures is ensuring that the communication, the messaging relates to the realities that we have. So for SPREP, as the mandated organization that serve our Pacific Island countries, we've got several filters to pass through. To get to, say, women groups, and hence when I first got introduced to the Caucus, I first asked is, I'm keen to understand who are the members in my region for us to connect. For me, that's something that's very fair. Because PrEP is mandated on the environment, protection and management services for the region. There is opportunity to communicate better across the different sectors. The gender action plan in Pacific in our different country context is has really advanced in terms of trying to connect with the different sectors, particularly in biodiversity and of course climate change has become a big agenda. So the practical measure here is ensuring that the communication and the messaging does not blur, because these are the realities. Communities, women groups, socially vulnerable groups in our communities do not need to deal with it. I think that's it's always at the back of our minds as practitioners, as policy advocates, to ensure that we stay real and connected to the issue on the ground. Thank you.
Please thank the panel with me. No, we're a little bit over time. Thank you so much. I'm going to pass it back to Ed.
Yes.
Thank you.
I will be quick, but I want to thank you, the panelists, for the inputs. Your Tiffany, thank you for moderation. The CBD communication with gender responsible implementation. It is efforts fly forward and represented by the Nairobi case, led by Megan in next. So what we have. Small because we all have big bags. Well, now we have come to the end of our event. Wrapping up, let me highlight 3 facts. The strong political mandate on gender responsive implementation needs to be grounded on the following approach. A key element to ground this is cooperation, regional cooperation that detonates. PSC is a necessity for gender justice and environmental justice, inclusivity, and diverse knowledge system exchange. Women in all our diversity are partners and actors, not only challenges to focus on long-term relationships, gender blind data, capacity gap, full and effective representation, and and the sorts of it. And concrete proposals address is engagement with the implementation and issues, strengthening implementation. It's a way to make PSC specific and to get inclusive technical solutions, leverage voices from the ground. Intentionality is definitely a common strength and will take us forward. That's going to be amazing. Okay. The CBD Campus is open and ready for different centers to engage with you, to engage with you on the ground in the topics in the very heart. We are. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
We're just conscious of everyone, you need to run through the contact groups and so on, but please do continue to speak. If you see us throughout the week, please come and say hello. We'll see you in the contact groups and negotiations.